Well, another day, another episode of Vlogmas. Welcome back everyone. Today we are talking about all the books I've read this year. Maybe you will get some book recommendations or just a cozy chat with your favorite drink. My choice today is a delicious gingerbread latte. I also have a very suspicious looking smoothie because I'm hungry. Let me know what you're drinking, if you're drinking something. And we'll start. So here you can see some of the physical books I have read this year, but I mostly read on my Kindle, which is here. We'll jump straight in with the first book that I read this year. I'm just opening my Goodreads so I actually remember what books I read and what I thought of them. Actually, before we start, I had a few reading goals, and those were only reading books by women. Because last year I read so many books by men that described women in such a horrible, annoying, stereotypical way that I was sick of it and I needed a break from men. And I had a wonderful year of reading, thank you very much. I also read mostly fantasy this year. I just wanted something really comforting, something that I knew I would like. I didn't necessarily challenge myself this year with reading, which I will do next year. I want to get back into different genres. The first book I read this year is The Flat Share. This is a romance book. I get on these moods that I really want to read romance, even though I know that I mostly hate romance because I'm just a hater. No, I love reading about love. Tiffy needs a cheap flat and fast. Leon works nights and needs cash. Their friends think they're crazy, but it's the perfect solution. Leon occupies the one-bed flat while Tiffy is at work in the day and she has to run off the place the rest of the time. So these two characters are sharing the bed but not actually sleeping together. Tiffy and Leon never see each other, but they start to leave notes for each other, and these notes turn into something more. And the humor in this book is actually really good. There is actually some good sarcasm, some snarky comments, some banter. I really loved it until the point when the characters get together. And this is how I feel every time with romance books. It's super lovey-dovey and I don't want to read that. That's my problem personally. It's not the romance book's problem. So this was 4 stars for me. I rarely like romance, so I really recommend this one. Next I read Daughter of the Moon Goddess. This was a super hyped fantasy book that takes place in China. And I'm always super excited about fantasy that takes place somewhere else than the UK or USA. Growing up on the moon, Xing Jing is accustomed to solitude, unaware that she is being hidden from the feared celestial emperor. But when Xing Jing's magic flares and her existence is discovered, she is forced to flee her home, leaving her mother behind. So the story is about Xing Jing that goes on this adventure on Earth while she has before just lived on the moon. I have never read about Chinese mythology, so I was really excited. But I was actually quite disappointed with this book because it felt like the characters were held at an arm's length at all times. And for me, I read books to feel the connection to the main characters and to really get to know them deeply. So that's why I gave it 3 stars. But if you like plot-driven fantasy books, this might be for you. Next I'm gonna talk about a book that I DNF'd, so did not finish. This book drove me into a huge reading slump when we were traveling in Southeast Asia in the beginning of this year. The Poppy War, an epic historical military fantasy inspired by the bloody history of China's 20th century and filled with treachery and magic. So Rin, who's the main character, is really poor and has a horrible childhood, but she gets into a really good military academy and starts to learn about war and about magic. This is a hugely hyped fantasy book, and frankly I just found the main character insufferable. She was the most irritating main character in the history of books that I have read. I could not care what happened to her. She was complaining all the time, and like in The Daughter of the Moon Goddess, I felt like the characters were really distant. I almost pushed myself to finish this book, and this is 545 pages because my friend Amina was also reading this, and we usually have the exact same taste in books. So I was like, maybe I like it, I just have to give it a chance. So I was forcing my way through this book, even though I didn't enjoy it. But what really did it for me was the violence, which was so unnecessarily, for me at least, unnecessarily described. There was a scene in this book where a pregnant woman is describing how she was harassed in the war, and I was feeling so ill, and I had only like 100 pages or 80 pages left, but I couldn't. I was like, this book is not for me, it's fine, it's not for me. That said, many people love this book, so maybe if you are not so sensitive as me, maybe, to violence, maybe you could enjoy it. I just feel like I read a different book to anyone else. So to get out of the reading slump that the Poppy War pushed me into, I picked up a classic from my childhood, A Shop for the Secret Seven. I loved these books as a kid and I can't really read it as an adult. Obviously, I'm not the target audience. It was really short, it was 130 pages. So I just flew through it, and after that I felt a bit better about my reading. What can I say? It was a really cute story. This next book I would have never picked up, but because we were in Southeast Asia and we were in this random bookstore and I saw this title, How Not to Travel the World, Adventures of a Disaster-Prone Backpacker. Oh my god. I found after reading this book that this author is a travel blogger, and this book is like based on her experiences traveling. Okay, so I said that Rin in the Poppy War was the most irritating main character ever, but this is even worse. The idea of the book is that the main character has no life experience, zero common sense, and has never eaten rice. She suffered from debilitating anxiety, was battling an eating disorder, and had just had her heart broken. And then she decides to go on this travel trip around the world alone. I just despised this book. The portrayal of mental illness was so surface level, as was the eating disorder. This character is obnoxious. So when she gets better at backpacking, she gets rid of almost everything she owns and only has a small backpack. And then she looks at other travelers who have big backpacks and she's just like, why do they have so much stuff? They know nothing. And I can't with this book. I would not recommend this book to anyone. I just wanted to read it because I was traveling in Southeast Asia, and also this character went to Southeast Asia, and those were the only good parts in the book, when she was describing the scenery, because I also had been in those places, so it was really special to me. Otherwise, no. Next I read a classic, because I have a goal every year to read a classic, at least one. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. There's also a movie about this book, portrayed by Marilyn Monroe, of course. So the main character, Lorelai, is super beautiful, blonde, that all the men want, and her boyfriend sends her away because all the men want to have her. So he sends her off to Europe to travel with her friend, and they have the best time and just flirt with all the men. And I found the writing style quite hard to get into, because like the character is supposed to be stupid, but when you get used to it, it's quite fun. Next I read the first 5-star book of this year, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. At university, two friends, Sam and Sadie, make a video game together, and it becomes successful. We follow their life from university to when they're adults, and they make games. And this book is so special. I love the aspect of video games. Like, I learned so much about making a video game, but I think this book is interesting to anyone, even if you don't play games yourself, because this is an extraordinary story about friendship, how complicated they are, how deep they are, how heartbreaking they can be. And I found this story so moving. Like, I couldn't put the book down when I was reading the story. It is truly magnificent, and I recommend it to anyone. Next we have another romance book, Shipped. Between taking night classes for her MBA and her demanding day job at a cruise line, marketing manager Henley Evans barely has time for herself, let alone family, friends, or dating. But when she's shortlisted for the promotion of her dreams, all her sacrifices finally seem worth it. But the problem is that her nemesis at work, the main man character, is also shortlisted for this promotion. So they go on a cruise together where they have to work together, and then the one who is more successful on that cruise gets the promotion. So it's kind of like enemies to lovers, but not really, because there's no tension. and there's no reason for them to be so like hateful. And this book is exactly what I don't like about romance books, because the characters are so stereotypical. I just could not sympathize with the main character at all. Maybe just because I can't see myself sacrificing everything for a job. So I found it really hard to like the characters and care what happens in the book. The book also makes a point of being like feminist or something in the end, and I just found it a bit cringy. I found the whole book quite cringy, to be honest. Next I read Bunny, which was super hyped dark academia book, kind of like Girls Gone Crazy. I had no idea about the plot when I was going into this book, and I think that's the best. Just know that it's gonna be dark and disgusting and crazy and sick and wonderful all at the same time. This is like Mean Girls gone dark and crazy. Read it, it's great. Next I went on a binge of Leigh Bardugo. Is that how you say her name? Leigh Bardugo. Let's just call her Bardugo for now. We are not friends. I wish I was, because she's amazing, an amazing author. First I read Six of Crows. The story takes place in Ketterdam, which is like a fictional version of Amsterdam, which was so well described. This book is amazingly written overall, but also the descriptions, like I felt I was there on the dark, bustling streets of Ketterdam. Cass Brecker, who is the criminal prodigy, is offered a chance at a deadly heist that could make him rich beyond his wildest dreams. There is a wide cast of characters who get their point of view, and they are all so amazing. The trope heist is my favorite. It's one of my favorites because it's so exciting. This book is so fast, adventurous. There are layers, there is romance, there is friendship, there is fighting. I highly recommend this to anyone who likes fantasy. Next I read the Shadow and Bone trilogy. With Shadow and Bone you can see it's more young adult, because the characters are quite, well, you can see they're teenagers, let's just say that. Even though in Six of Crows they are also teenagers, but you can see that because they are not annoying. But I went into this trilogy knowing that this is probably not as good, so I was just really enjoying the ride. So the story is about Alina Stargo, who is a refugee girl in Ravka, which is a nation surrounded by enemies, and the Shadowfold, which is like this darkness that nobody can go through because it's full of monsters. Alina is just a normal girl in the military, but then she discovers that she has special powers. Everyone is very interested in these special powers because they can possibly save them from the Shadowfold. So very classic setup with fantasy, this one young girl who can save the world, but it works so well. Next I tried my luck with fantasy again with Happy Place. Harriet and Wynne are the perfect couple, or so it seems, because they have actually broken up, but they haven't told their friends. They go on this holiday with their friends. The only thing I liked about this book was the friendship dynamic, because I think it was very well done. She wrote so well about how complex friendships can be. They are not easy sometimes. There are arguments and fighting sometimes. But the love interest Wynne was the least interesting character ever. I could not see why Harriet worshipped this man, because all he had to him was self-loathing and calloused hands, which was, by the way, mentioned multiple times each chapter. I just wish they would write books about basic people who look really basic, about men who are not huge, about women who are not super thin. Another light book next, The Summer Switch Off. I went into this book not expecting anything because it is obviously a young adult romance book. I was gonna say fantasy, no, romance. And I actually really enjoyed this one. This was a super light-hearted story about 3 young women who went on this holiday solo. So we have point of views from all these 3, and they meet each other on this holiday and they become friends. And it is just a really funny story. There is some romance there, there is some reflection. And now we are back to fantasy, and post-apocalyptic fantasy this time, called Penryn and the End of Days. It's been 6 weeks since angels of the apocalypse descended to demolish the modern world. Street gangs rule the day, while fear and superstition rule the night. When warrior angels fly away with a helpless little girl, Her 17-year-old sister Pendrin will do anything to get her back. Anything, including making a deal with an enemy angel. This idea was so interesting to me. I love reading about angels because I was a super fan of the show Supernatural. So I just love angels as a concept in fantasy. This was a dark, gripping fantasy. I was on the edge of my seat reading this multiple times. This main character Pendrin was so badass. I loved her. She was sarcastic, she was tough, she was doing anything to save her sister. This trilogy goes into very weird directions at some points, but I was enjoying it the whole time. Next I read The Serpent and the Wings of Night. This book reads like fanfiction, but in a good way. If you have read fanfiction, you know what I mean. Like, there are two characters and you want them to be together, so you don't really care if the world building is vague. You don't really care if everything is quite expected to happen. The adopted human daughter of the Nightborn vampire king, Oraya, carved her place in a world designed to kill her. Her only chance to become something more than prey is entering the Kechari, a legendary tournament held by the goddess of death herself. To survive, Oraya is forced to make an alliance with a mysterious rival. I have mixed feelings about this one. I loved the main character. She was brilliant and tough. There was some snarky dialogue with the love interest, but the love interest himself fell quite flat for me. But the story was really fast-paced and exciting, so I was enjoying that. Next I read The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. Last year I read her trilogy and it was amazing, so I was super excited about this one and I wasn't disappointed. She describes places in a way that it makes them feel alive and vibrant. I have pictures in my head from this book that feel like real memories. It felt like I was there in the Middle East. After a scandalous career as one of the Indian Ocean's most notorious pirates, Amina al-Sirafi survived backstabbing rogues, vengeful merchant princes, several husbands and one actual demon to retire peacefully with her family, but then she is offered a job no bandit could refuse. Retrieve a comrade's kidnapped daughter for a kingly sum. So this is a story about an ex-pirate and I found it such an interesting setup because this main character, Amina, is 40 or 50, I'd say, but she's not a teenager. She's not a 20-year-old. She is a mother and I loved reading about this older woman character. She was so tough, she knew her worth, she didn't care what men thought about her, she was kicking ass. Next I read Legendborn. After her mother dies in an accident, 16-year-old Bree Matthews wants nothing to do with her family memories or her childhood home. Bree goes on this high school program which is not in her home state, and then she finds out there is a secret society and she sees something she shouldn't. I don't really know how to describe this book because the magic system is super intricate. There is a lot of info dumping in this book and I found it a bit jarring, but the story itself is incredible. As well as being a banging fantasy book, let me say, this book deals with a lot of deeper issues like racism, class. It talks about grief in such a beautiful way. It really touched me. I was crying with this book. The second book was amazing as well, and I can't wait for the third one to come out in 2025. I can't wait for that long. Next I read the first and the only, unfortunately, Finnish book. So this is Song, which is a fantasy book, and let me just tell you that this might be, this is the best book I read this year, for sure. So if you can read in Finnish, but you're not even a fantasy fan, I still recommend this book. Because this is such a deep exploration of friendship again, and romance, and just what being human means. And fantasy in this book is quite subtle in a way that it's more like spiritual, and I found it super fascinating. I was reading this on the train and I was sobbing in a public place. There were people around me. I was sobbing. I can't wait for the second book to come out. I think it comes out next year. This comes out 18th of April, so a day before my birthday. This is the best birthday present I could get. Next I read A Darker Shade of Magic. Kel is one of the last Antari magicians with a rare ability to travel between parallel Londons. Red London, Grey London, White London and Once Upon a Time, Black London. The idea is so intriguing to me, but the characters felt so distant to me that I just couldn't care. I was really disappointed with this book, and I'm not gonna read the second one. Next, Howl's Moving Castle. So obviously I have seen the anime, which is amazing. This book is quite different from the anime. I found it really like cozy fantasy. In theory it was really interesting, but for some reason I just couldn't focus on it. So maybe it was my problem, I was like going through something. But I do think the anime is better. Ninth House. So we are back to Bardugo. This is not set in the same world as Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows. This is a dark academia book, which I love for autumn and for winter, for the moody grey days. Wait, I have this book. This was actually quite sick. This was horrifying. So definitely, if you're interested about this book, please read the trigger warnings, because yeah, it is quite disgusting. So there are secret societies in Yale University, and Alex, our main character, gets swindled with the societies and crazy things happen. Basically, there are ghosts in this book. Let's go through a rabbit hole of insanity and nostalgia and talk about these books. I don't know how to describe these books, but I read this as a kid. Maybe you did too, if you are my age. There are, I think, overall over 50 of these books. So our friend was visiting us here in the autumn, and we were talking about our childhood, and these books came up in the conversation. And in a moment of insanity, I went to Amazon and ordered the first 6. I must say, I really enjoyed reading these. I'm not an adult. I'm a 29-year-old child. So the idea behind these books is that these 5 friends, Jake, Tobias, Cassie, Rachel, and Margot, are walking home from a mall, and they see a spaceship crash, and out of the spaceship comes an alien, and the alien tells these kids that another alien species is taking over the world. Yerks are going through humans' ears to the brains, and they take over the humans and control them. And then this nice alien gives these kids powers to morph into any animals they like. They just need to touch an animal and absorb the DNA, and then they can turn into that animal, so they can then fight the evil aliens. And let me just tell you that this series is a roller coaster of emotions, but mostly traumatic experiences when the kids turn into ants and are almost killed by other ants, while the ants are biting their legs off, and I loved every bit of it. Okay guys, we have come to the end. The final books that I read this year are the Harry Potters. I read the Finnish translations. I grew up reading this. I read the first one when I was 8 years old, and Deathly Hallows came out in English when I was 13. So safe to say, my whole personality is based on Harry Potters, and Harry Potters are the reason why I'm so escapistic. I read these in about a month, a bit over a month, and for that whole month I was crazy. I was just reading and crying the whole time and laughing out loud, but I am empty inside now that I finished the Deathly Hallows a few days ago. And that brings me to the book I'm reading now, Vicious by V. Schwab. And for the life of me, I just can't get into this book because I'm still processing Harry Potters, but it seems really interesting. But for now, that's enough books for a lifetime. I have sat here on the floor and my coffee is completely cold and I didn't drink it. And I also didn't drink my smoothie, and I'm really hungry right now. This is the last book I will talk about, Crime and Punishment. I have been trying to read this so I can fall asleep easier, and that is definitely the only good thing so far that this book has done to me. So I'm on page 55 right now. I hope you're still awake. If you're still here, let me know what was the best book you read this year, or a book you want to read next year. Thank you so much for watching me ramble about books. I'm so tired. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.